Ideas are sort of like set up to continue to live, and killing enough of them is hard because this whole process of starting a business from scratch, having it scale to a certain point, there's going to be way more failures than there are wins. So you need a little bit of a system to figure out how to kill ideas. The way that we are trying to do that is by really rigorously breaking down the process into smaller chunks and having some level of measurable KPI at every single chunk. So ultimately, you're like, yeah, I want a $50 million business. But guess what? There's years between I've got an idea and I've got a $50 million business.
Hi, I'm Jason Harris, and you're listening to Soul and Science. Fast forward your marketing mind in about 20 minutes. Today, I'm speaking with Douglas Martin, a disruptive marketer and brand growth champion with over 22 years of experience. Doug believes that branding can be used to enrich our lives and solve real-world problems. He is currently the Chief Brand and Disruptive Growth Officer at General Mills, having worked on marketing initiatives for Cheerios and Yoplait. Doug's experience spans across household names in addition to General Mills, with roles at Gap and Walt Disney Studios. On today's episode, you'll learn about how a massive company that's not only a household name, but 167 years old, can still disrupt their categories. All right, let's dive in and fast forward our marketing minds. Doug, tell me your origin story, how you got into marketing.
Yes, good question. So, I grew up, my dad was a business school professor. So like this idea of business was vaguely in the household conversation from the get-go. And I went to Wharton undergrad because I'm like, I'd like to do business. And it turns out that's not specific enough to be super useful. And so I actually graduated not still understanding what I wanted to do. I wound up in the retail clothing industry because I was like, well, this is something, everyone has a point of view on it. And so I worked at a couple of luxury brands and then ultimately wound up at the Gap working on Old Navy. So I really got excited about this, making a real product that really connects with real people. But I quite frankly did not have a perspective about like where the future of fashion is going. And so I was like, I got to zig here a little bit. And I went back to business school and sort of discovered CPG marketing through business school. And what I liked was real products consumed by millions of real people every day, and also still a promise of learning how to run a business, which all those many years later, I was still trying to figure out. So that's what coming to General Mills and CPG marketing was about for me, that combination of really impacting people and learning about business.
Was there anything you learned at your experience at the Gap that you still use today?
A ton of things, but I would say the one that sticks with me is, and I was there 20 years ago, so nobody who has mentioned this story, I'm sure is still there, but it was Old Navy, and Old Navy was real clothes for real people at a good price point. You can clothe your family. And one of the things I realized while I was there was everyone I was working with was wearing clothes and living in a world that their consumer did not live in. And so I worked with a lot of people who thought sort of in the back of their mind, maybe they're competing with high fashion brands. And I wore Old Navy clothes to work every day and did not fit in because of that. But I think that has stuck with me is that you have to understand at some level the world that your actual consumer operates in order to serve them better. And I don't pretend to believe that I am my consumer on all the brands that we market at General Mills, but you have to take a step back and actually think about what their experience is if you're going to do something to improve it.
Obviously, you've been there for a bit. I know what a chief brand officer does. How did you land on the disruptive growth title?
I came here in the brand management function. So I worked here for 16 years, kind of like working my way up through our P&L ownership function, which is brand management. And then, as you said, the chief brand officer is the CMO, right? That is what it is in other places. But in my experience, I had had more kind of experience and wins in the new product world than maybe on average.
Okay.
And so the disruptive growth part of my job is sort of a separate ecosystem where we are trying to increase the ways that we can take a bunch of swings at creating new growth. And so it's not, hey, we're going to launch a new Cheerios or things like that. Those are things that we do really, really well within our core of our business. But it is a venture studio. So small teams of co-founders starting up new businesses from scratch, but that we own internally completely. It is a corporate venture capital fund so that we can invest in some of the things that we see that might be disruptors coming to our world, and we can talk about what that looks like. And it's also how might we create a space to invest in high growth businesses that we're pretty excited about, but that are not ready from a scale standpoint to be put into the very scaled machine that is General Mills.
I got you. And so those entrepreneurs in the organization that you help facilitate their success, are they in the actual building? Do they sit somewhere else? Are they tapping the same resources, or is it a completely different ecosystem?
It's a great question. It's one we actually thought a lot about kind of pre-COVID when, at the time there were people who were like, yeah, let's take these cool kids and go buy a loft downtown and have the cool kids live there and do their cool kid thing. And I think what people generally found was if your hope is to have some two-way influence, right, where you're going to rotate people back in and they're going to go back to a core job and they're going to say, hey, I learned some interesting new ways of working. If you completely separate them, your chances of doing that are not good.
There's still a residual effect of hustle culture where there's this kind of belief that if you have an idea and you work hard enough at it, it will become successful by like sheer force of will. But the reality is most ideas are bad.
Yeah.
Most ideas just, no matter how much time and energy and hours you put into something, it still is just not a good enough idea. So how do you filter if it's the right idea or not?
This is a really important question. And actually, I would say one of the things I think people who work in a system like this are always worried, oh, I hope they don't kill my idea or whatever, they being, whoever's making decisions. And the truth is, ideas are sort of like set up to continue to live, and killing enough of them is hard because this whole process of starting a business from scratch, having it scale to a certain point, there's going to be way, way, way more failures than there are wins. So you need a little bit of a system to figure out how to kill ideas. The way that we are trying to do that is by really rigorously breaking down the process into smaller chunks and having some level of measurable KPI at every single chunk. So ultimately, you're like, yeah, I want a $50 million business. But guess what? There's years between I've got an idea and I've got a $50 million business. So how do you start learning from real consumers in a real world environment much, much sooner on that? And early on, it could be just a matter of, hey, I put this message out into the world for a branded product that doesn't actually exist yet. And not enough people interacted with this message for me to believe that, I do have it figured out just yet. So now I need to go back and figure it out. But the other thing I didn't say, other than the metrics thing, is we're pretty serious about starting with big picture problems to solve, right? You don't want a great idea to solve the nichiest problem in the world. It'll never get you to scale. So one thing that we have a lot of confidence in is these are the problems we're going to get after. These problems themselves are meaningful problems. And yes, there's a lot of different ways into them, but you're going to start in one of these.
Right.
And so as an example, I have a medical condition that requires me to eat a certain type of way. You can imagine 300 different solutions to that, where there's different medical issues, different solutions, et cetera. But that's a real problem that we know is a high level problem that a lot of people experience. And it's about metered funding too. It's like, listen, here's the problem, and X number of people have this issue, and we're going to spend 3 months, and we're going to start with whatever, $50,000 just to make sure this is right. And then they're going to come back, they're going to report on that, say, yep, enough people have this issue. This is an interesting look. The next 3 months, now we're going to build out a rough solution. And, so you're building your investment as you go. And at every stage, you're really rigorously trying to tie back to some level of proof points, and that no one proof point, because it's a quick and dirty experiment, is perfect, but you're building a kind of a body of evidence approach to over time building your belief in what you're doing.
If you did 10 of these, how many would you say succeed?
I mean, it depends on if the what the metric of success is. So, I mean, you're talking about getting to sustaining scale out of 10 ideas. Maybe it's one or two.
Okay.
I mean, it's not easy.
That's pretty good though.
I mean, I think the other kind of myth we're trying to debunk is growth is expensive no matter how much you slice it. Like when you're gonna get to scale, there's gonna be real investment.
Yeah.
But it's about how do I de-risk that ultimately scaled investment through that body of evidence approach. So it's not, we spent a year and a half, in theoretical environments, and now we're building this thing for a launch everywhere in America at once. That's going to require a $20 million, support budget, right? It's now now I'm in 10 stores. I'm not, now I'm in, I'm a hypothetical online environment. Now I'm in 10 stores. Now I'm building over time and continuing to iterate over time, because there's also no finish line, right? There's no point in time where you're like, well, now it's perfect. You're always going to be learning and evolving some things.
So General Mills is such a massive household name. I know you, Cheerios, Yoplait. And when you're working on brands like that, like everything in America, we're growth oriented. Everything has to grow quarter by quarter, annually. When you work on brands like that, do you get to a point where you're like, this thing is successful, it's a household name, like there is no more growth to squeeze out of it? We just want it to stay flat for 10 years.
My like kind of non-business oriented friends that will always ask me versions of that question, but like, isn't Cheerios big enough? Like, isn't it cool? Can you just keep on keeping on? And the truth is, no. We always believe that there's another consumer that we can bring this benefit to and grow with.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of have to. I mean, obviously, we are a publicly traded corporation. I literally tried to explain this to a friend of mine the other day. I was like, listen, it's not as if like if you owned as a family company the Cheerios company, you'd be like, okay, cool, we're making a great product, people love it, nothing has to change. We do have growth expectations as General Mills, and those growth expectations are not what people expect from Amazon, but there is still, and the greatest example is Cheerios. Like we've been bringing heart healthy Cheerios and finding new ways to tell those messages for a long time, and we continue to find ways to grow.
When you launch something like We by Yoplait, a new development, what do you learn by doing that, and how do you see it relating to the master brand there?
So that was a couple years of my life. Remember when we were talking about disruptive growth, we talked about the opposite, which is like, let's launch something big everywhere. We by Yoplait is a perfect example of that. And I think the starting point of that journey was realizing and deeply acknowledging the fact that the yogurt category had changed pretty dramatically around us. Like if you get back in the history machine, yogurt was like a weirdo health food in the early 70s. And Yoplait, which launched in like 75, something like that, was one of the first brands that was like, hey, we're going to make it really tasty. And also, we have this amazing French kind of heritage. We're a fancy French heritage yogurt. Fast forward to when we launched we had to take a step back and realize that a lot of the category had innovated and premiumized around us, while Yoplait was the same thing that it was before. So the entire brief, what became We by Yoplait, was, what if we were starting from scratch? Day one is today. What is the best, most French, most pure yogurt that we could make? And that was We. And so we realized that this was going to speak to a different segment of the consumer. This was going to be a premium price. This yogurt, the original style Yoplait, was still going to be an incredibly important business for us. A lot of moms buying Yoplait for the whole family, but this was going to be more for her, for herself, a little bit more special. And so expanding how we could be for more people with the foundation that Yoplait, the buy Yoplait, meant I can trust that this is going to be delicious.
Yeah.
That's what that meant for people.
And you think if you didn't have it connected to Yoplait, it would have been a much harder slog?
We talk about that so much.
I bet.
And that was one of like the two biggest conversations that we had on the business. And what it came down to for me was when you talk to people about trying a new product, they talk to you oftentimes about a level of risk, and that's it's not an investment, right? It's $1.19 yogurt or whatever it is. But like, I don't want to go home with 6 of those and find out I don't like it.
Yeah.
That's legitimate risk for me. And so the Biope really said taste. What we did though was couple that with a lot of really visible decisions that also said this is very, very different, right? So it's in a glass jar.
Yeah.
I can see the product. It has the simplest ingredient deck possible, et cetera, et cetera. So like, even though it said by Yoplait, no one was confused that it was the same thing in a different cup.
So you have a lot of responsibility, which we covered. At General Mills, there's, I don't know, it's 17, 18 billion revenue.
It's just about 20
billion revenue. You have, I don't know, 40,000 employees, maybe more by now. Because it's so scaled and massive, how do you think about the business impact and then correspondingly the cultural or social impact that you have on the world?
First of all, thank you. I feel very seen by how.
Oh man, that job's brutal.
I mean, there's a lot of answers to that question. I think the first one I would say is that I don't have to do all of it, right? And I do come to work feeling really, really good about the people that I work with, that I also know care deeply about what we're doing and the impact we're having on the world. And so, just as an example, this is a super obvious point, but something that needs to be made. Everything that we do, everything we make and sell is an agricultural commodity that we put together with some other tasty ingredients, put it in a box and sell it, right? So everything comes out of the ground. And so we've been pretty committed to regenerative farming practices, right? How do we leave the soil in a better place than it was before? That has nothing to do with me, but I need to help teams find the right way to tell those stories. And that actually turns out to be a really complicated story that a lot of people don't understand the nuances of it. But point being, I walk in the door in the morning feeling pretty good about the people I work with and the care that we've had over time. But it isn't easy, and nothing is as simple as you would like it to be. And there have been times when you just don't know the answer. I was on Cheerios when we got targeted by an advocacy group that was quite concerned that genetically modified agriculture was going to like kill us all. And oh God, I felt it so personally. They're posting things about how we're like, you're feeding Cheerios to babies, it's poison or whatever.
Oh my God.
And it was horrible. But you take that same issue and you fast forward, 10 years from when that happened. And like, we do have a requirement and obligation to actually feed the world. And so it's not as black or white as what, groups who are in their little lanes might believe. And so we try to take a science-based approach. We try to do something that we believe deeply in. We try to create products we believe in. And then we also, and this is the most important part, work every day to make them a little bit better. How do we make our products recyclable? I could talk about recyclability forever, and it's super complicated. And part of the reason it's so complicated is that it's different in every municipality in every part of this country, right? It's an infrastructure issue. So we're trying to make products that are recyclable for most people, but honestly, hey, no one wants to hear it, but it'd be a lot better if we had a singular national set of standards on recyclability and how we're recycling things in our community. People go nuts if you talk about that because you want to, you're not a lot of momentum on federalizing everything at the moment. But we're going to make the changes that we can make within our control every time we can, and try to be a little bit better tomorrow. Someone's going to be mad no matter what, all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes you might have dual positive intentions that conflict. Like, for example, I want packaging to be recyclable, and I want food to be protected and safe, right? There are times when those things come in contact with each other and they're not pulling in the same direction. You're like, okay, well, for now we need to prioritize safety, and then we're going to have to keep working to develop whatever, a film or a material or whatever that can do both, and it's going to take time. So understanding your starting point and what you're trying to do is critical. And then honestly, every time someone's upset at us about something, I'm upset too. Not I have not, there is no internal state of calm. What I try to do is not overreact, especially with the team, right? If we knew we were trying to do the right thing, let's realize that there's an issue. Let's address it if we need to. Let's keep moving forward. But there is no perfection.
I like that insight, though. I think that's a real good learning is that you won't always do the right thing. But if by and large, your starting place is let's try to make the right decision, you always can go back to that and not feel like there was necessarily a misstep, but we're still not going to absolve ourselves from any issues, but we're going to at least start with that premise. I think that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah. And the magic phrase there is like, and here's what we learned.
Yeah.
Right? Like, here's what we were trying to do. This is what we thought happened. And here's what we learned. There is no like, well, good news. We got everything right. And that's why we're successful. Like, you're going to make mistakes and then you've got to do something about it. And I think having a personal expectation of perfection is completely debilitating. You cannot do that.
Is there an unpopular but important decision that you personally pushed for in the organization?
I'll tell you one. I don't know that I would call it unpopular, but certainly that had some friction was when I worked on. We talked about We by Yoplait already. I was the like new product director, okay, which means there was a Yoplait brand director sitting over here, and for me from this chair over here to say, hey, guess what? Original red cup Yoplait isn't as fancy and exclusive as we once thought it was. We need to update our perceptions of what this brand is now, who it is for now. That was at times a tense conversation because it could feel like you're saying the brand team is missing the boat, right?
Yeah.
The brand team is not living in the same reality that the rest of us are in, and that's not the case, right? We always have people who are like deeply passionate about the brands that we're working on, and so it had to be a conversation about, oh no, you're not cool anymore. It had to be a conversation about, listen, actually, you're doing an incredible thing for moms of families, and you got to keep doing it and focus on that with the reality of what you're actually doing. And I had this one, so there's an amazing. We were in a home, it's pre-COVID, and we were in a mom's fridge, and she had yogurt that was for her that was more expensive on the top shelf of the fridge because the kids couldn't reach it, and all the red cup Yoplait was in the like dump drawer so the kids could reach it. And so on the one hand, you've got this negative side of that learning, which is like, oh, we're not on the shelf for her anymore. But what we had to really emphasize was you're in the easy access family shelf because everyone in the house loves it. So take that like from a negative place and spin it, not spin it, but like really focus on the positive elements of, which is like, you're for the whole family. Yeah. Everyone thinks you're delicious. That's great. We need to be in both places on the fridge if we want to win.
What is the best part of the job for you? And what is the hardest part of the job for you?
I love to think about the future, right? And I love to think about like, okay, how are we going to set ourselves up for success in that future? That's fun. It's also the hardest part of the job because, this is a house of brands, not a branded house. We have literally a couple dozen categories that we operate in with different teams, and change management on process stuff is maybe way more important than the vision, but also not it's like it's grinded out work. It's like, let's create a process, let's work the process, let's continue to train on the process, let's iterate on the process. That's not the place where you're excited to run home and tell your family about a minor process improvement that you made today. But if you don't do that stuff, then none of that exciting chatter about the future means anything.
In your marketing efforts, do you rely more on your head or your heart? Are you more soul or science?
Well, I guess personally, I would like to believe that I'm a more soul, but that I'm really, really dedicated in myself as a student to learning the science part of it, right? Because big surprise, you got to do both. So I'd say that that's true on the personal front. I think General Mills as a whole, we start from a place of we build brands that we believe in. We build brands that have a reason to show up in the world, and that's very much on the soul side. Um, and also, like by the time you execute it, we're in well over 90% of the households in America. Grocery is a very rapid purchase cycle business. You know what I mean? You're buying in the yogurt category, your purchase cycle is 3 weeks. And so we also used to have to remind ourselves all the time, like, yeah, there's what does Yoplait stand for? It's for mom, and it's doing these incredible things, and we believe in girls, we believe in all these positive things. But also, I gotta remember to get you on that grocery list.
Right.
Like you've got to do both in a business like this, and I kind of in a pretty 50-50 way.
Do you have a favorite quote or mantra that you always go back to, either when times are good or when times are hard?
Every 2 weeks, I relearn that every person is going through something that you don't know anything about. And I remind myself that all the time. And if I ever forget that, it's usually because I should have been thinking that. And I feel like we are not in a great place right now collectively as a group of human beings in this country. And there's so many people that I work with who are going through like really difficult personal things. And the fact that they show up at work and smile and do the good, thoughtful work that they do is amazing. So I try to ground myself in that pretty regularly. You know, we are selling Cheerios, we are selling Yoplait. It's a great, fun thing to be doing, but it's not the whole lives of the people who come to the office and do it with us. So I try to remind myself of that as much as I can.
If you're trying to crack a problem, do you have a process for that, or a place or a way?
Usually what I like to do is sit down with an actual pen and like white paper and get some thoughts on a page so that I can at least frame up a really good problem statement that you can then go to a team with, right? So I'm not hey, everybody, let's just start talking about this right away kind of a person. I need space to kind of formulate that initial seed of how might we start to tackle this. And so I'm always trying to manage. I don't want to be the guy who goes out by himself all the time. And it's also hard to fit that in, but it is important to my process. And what I used to do was like to go away and come back with a solution, right? That would feel great. And what I realized is if I can go away and come back with a really clear statement of the problem, that's much better.
I love that, because a lot of meetings you spend most of the time trying to get to that idea of what you're trying to solve for before you even start solving for it.
Right. And you don't know if you've solved for it if you don't know what the problem exactly is.
Last question, Doug. How would you describe your business style in one word?
Oh, wow. I'd like to say thoughtful.
Thoughtful. But
again, that's aspirational, right? I try not to freak out about anything, but I like to say bringing a thoughtful approach to what are always incredibly high expectations of everything that we do.
Well, thank you for bringing a thoughtful approach to this podcast. I'm excited to see what comes next for you and General Mills, because I think they're lucky to have you there. And I think you're a fantastic marketer. So thanks for being on the podcast.
Jason, it was a treat. Thank you.
Soul and Science is a Mechanism podcast produced by Maggie Bowles, Ryan Tillotson, Tyler Nielsen, Emma Swanson, and Lily Jablonski. The show is edited by Daniel Ferreira with theme music by Kyle Merritt. And I'm your host, Jason Harris.